I'm like kind of wondering like how the memory will be like in the basic Spring Boot by default, what is the heap size? How do we increase the memory? Like what will happen if more requests are coming? So those kind of questions I'm not clear. So as part of our today progress, like could you please help us understanding these things?
Sure, Ravi. Sure. In fact, that is one agenda. We are traveling the same boat, by the way. I'm coming from application background. Vaibhav is coming from
Yeah,
platform.
yeah, yeah.
So from
Yeah,
an
yeah.
application developer, the way we look at memory is altogether different. In fact, we don't even care. We don't need to care. That is how it was actually. But
Yeah, as a developer, like we used to write the code, but we didn't care about the memory.
yes,
But
yes.
we always focus on like writing the good quality code. That's it. So like how it is going to impact it, like those things we would like to know. Yeah, thank you.
Sure, Ravi. Sure, Ravi.
Vaibhav, one more thing. You talked about garbage collection, right? So there is also a concept called memory pools, where a lot of the platforms will use it for giving memory and for even for caching. So even for the stack and heap, the pool is used, wherein the process which is executing will not be immediately terminated. It will be kept in a pool, the memory whatever is allocated. So are we also having that feature in JVM? Why I'm asking this question is because garbage collection is the opposite thing. It's whenever we allocate, we want to deallocate. But is there a way wherein we use the pool of memory, wherein we don't terminate that process, we keep it in a pool and then terminate later?
I think Anirab have asked this question. Yeah, Anirab, glad that you have bring this question. There are a lot of deep concern related to the memory management in the recent days. Okay, and as someone have pointed out before, that like as a developer, we really don't think about much about the memory management, and we just go ahead and write the code, right? But what happens that being to the microservices and cloud environment and Docker environment, what happens that memory became a constant because it's directly related to your money. Okay, this was my plan on like third day of the slide, but still just before Satish will start, I will share my screen and I will just give you a glimpse. Okay, so you can see that there is a lot of effort which has been done. You can see my screen, right? Yeah, so my screen talks about JEP 346, where what we are doing is that Java also used to reserve a lot of memory actually, right? So, a lot of things like XMS and XMN. Okay, so what Java used to do, like say like you have reserved 1 gigabyte of memory, right? And your maximum heap utilization is like say 400 MB at any point of time. Okay, so we used to feel good like, okay, let it be reserved. If something goes wrong, it will use the reserved memory. But what we used to think it was good, but no, now it's a concern. Okay, so we have a very smart techniques to understand that the uncommitted heap, right? So the heaps which are not getting used, actually, we will return back to operating system. Okay. And I am telling you that even if the garbage collector is not running, we are in a good position to return it back to the operating system. First, what used to happen, I mean, again, I will go a little bit in mess with the garbage collector, but there is a minor GC which runs in the young generation, and there is a major GC which runs in the old generation, and there is a full GC which runs when it scans the complete heap. So older time when we used to do full GC, actually, we used to return the memory to the operating system. Okay. But now even without triggering the garbage collector, we are in a good shape to return the memory to the garbage collector. And this holds good for the G1, which is currently like the default garbage collector, and it holds good on all the advanced garbage collector like GGC. Even if I search like promptly return heap to OS, say like GGC, I think I should get like I definitely know that I will get the JEP related to that also. Okay, so we will discuss this into detail, but I hope that I am able to set at least some background for you to understand it later.
Yes,
okay.
This is a good thing, but there is one more thing. The application has, I know in C++ that you can actually expand using multi-map STL. I think same thing is possible in Java. You can expand the memory and application space, especially the thread. We can expand the memory and it can consume the complete heap. So how we are going to like restrict the application not to use the entire heap available? So that will be my next question, because we have this kind of issues in our application, like the backend stuff. So basically wanted to know how do you handle this kind of scenario. One scenario you told is like you are whatever is unallocated heap, you are giving it to the
Operating,
OS
yes,
operating system.
or container,
Other
whatever
thing
it
is,
is.
how do you expand? So there is a thing is applications can also use the heap and expand it. So if it expands and it goes to the maximum heap, do we have any restriction, or how do we stop this kind of thing for stopping a segmentation fault? So that is what I was interested in. If you take it, will be good. Yeah.
Okay. Satish, if you'll give me one more minute. So I believe that you're talking on the application level, and application level heap can be always stopped by like the maximum limitation of the heap. If your concern is that as an application developer, how we can do that, then I believe that there are a lot of tool analysis which we continuously run. I mean, generally, I don't write much of application where
I am talking about a heap. So the tool basically is a heap allocator. So it's a tool which does the backend stuff. So it's not an application. Application uses that, and it basically stores all the memory in a memory pool, and it uses internally some kind of trees or something. I'm not sure on that. So I am saying that just imagine that. Talk about let's talk about application, but let's talk about some middleware or JVM. So basically, if some critical process intends to increase the memory, whatever it is consuming, it might be a system process only. So what is the chance of it not taking the entire heap? That is my question. I'm not just talking about application. I'm talking about any process. How do we ensure that it doesn't? How do we restrict it not to use the entire heap so that we don't have space to execute any more process? So that was the question.
Okay, I understood. See, unfortunately, the first level operating system reserves heap for the application level differently and for the OS level differently. Unfortunately, when you are running a monolithic application and you are not in a container and you are running like a normal application, Java will not let you restrict for the multi-JVM. I mean, you can definitely provide some kind of command line from which you can say that, okay, reserve this much heap. The best deal is that if you are inside a container, right? So in container, you can definitely restrict your number of CPUs and the heap and the memory usage. Okay, so I can have like some kind of container management, say Kubernetes or Marathon, and I can say, okay, this Docker instance, I will only give 1 GB. This Docker instance, I will give 2 GB. So they really cannot go beyond that limitations. Okay, but for a monolithic application, you really have to use some of the commands which I believe Java provide, which we actually discourage to use it. Okay, we don't encourage people to use it. Anything else Satish can add into it?
Yeah, that is very good. That is what I needed. So yeah, okay. Because this kind of thing, the process has the facility to expand the memory, whatever it's currently using. So if there is some kind of restriction, or how do we check for some kind of like this kind of restriction? So it is exceeding the memory. So do we have any kind of thing from JVM, or it is completely to the application to write this kind of code to restrict that memory? So that was the thing. But anyway, that is, I think we can discuss about that later. You can go ahead.
Wouldn't XMS and setting max heap solve the problem? Means we have that flag, right? XMS, and I'm not sure what's the exact flag, but we already have it, right?
Yeah. So that is what I'm saying. But even if you set, so you need to set it for from the application only for all those processes, max heap. Otherwise, what will happen is it is going to consume. No, you are telling max heap is the maximum heap possible, or what is the maximum heap application uses?
What's the maximum heap that the application can use? Means let's say you have 10 GB RAM, but you can tell that, okay, my application must run only in 1 GB RAM or 700 MB.
Yes,
we can
yeah, that is done for the application. So I was just telling that just JVM provide any restriction, because we were telling, right, how application memory is allocated and how OS memory is allocated is different. So just wanted to check that from the system side or from the JVM side, is there any check that application is taking too much memory, which is going to exhaust the heap? So from application, anyway, there will be APIs to do it, but does the system check it? That was the question. But okay, I think it is kind of clear that application has to do it.
Application, as in you are not writing it. Means you tell to JVM that, okay, this is the maximum amount of heap I want, and if you are crossing it, JVM and OOM exception, means your application will crash.
Yes. Got it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, application will not crash in the OOM. OOM is just an exception. You can handle it and you can proceed forward.
Oh, okay. My mistake then. Sorry.
Yeah.
Then we'll start, Vaibhav.
Please, Satish.
Yeah. Okay, so we will go to the today's session. That's okay. But before that, we need to know. I mean, if this particular item is not clear, right? It doesn't make sense actually. We attend continuous sessions actually. So let us be very clear about why memory is important. One thing. Let us take a lighter side, a short-term benefit of knowing a memory management. See, ultimately, like Vaibhav also touched upon that point just now. So I'm just reiterating. In fact, in one of the sessions that we had earlier, when we discuss about infrastructure as an architecture, why should I be focusing more on that part of code? We discussed this. Basically, whatever software that you write, you own piece of code that you write, your developers write, okay? But ultimately, is that alone makes your software run? No. For example, if you consider where your software runs, your software is going to run, whether it is cloud or not, it is going to run on some OS, let it be Linux or Windows. Then they are running in Java kind of a thing, they are running on virtual machines. For example, it might be JVM or .NET. And on top of that, you are running on libraries or frameworks. For example, Spring Boot or .NET Entity or whatever it is. After that, it is your piece of code. So your code comes last. Your code doesn't come first. So that we need to be very, very clear. Why this is very important is when you are going to cloud today, it is from your packet that you are paying money. For example, this piece of code is written from you and you need to manage it. It is your headache. But if you know how to optimize them, if you know how to tweak, say, for example, there is something called context switching that you can optimize for any VM related applications. It's very easy to do some flagging actually. And then if you can make some memory related optimizations at the JVM level where it provides a lot of options, you can do it very easily. And then you can make some optimization at the Spring Boot or whatever it is. The point to be noted here is whatever that you do here, point number A, it is free. You don't need to do anything. All that you should be knowing is you should have that attention to the detail to know where I am running, how do I tweak my engines, how do I optimize my engines. You can take the bike, ride it directly, or otherwise you can take a pass, look at the engine conditions, look at the petrol conditions, look at that everything that you want to set for the long travel and start your travel late, but you will finish fast and you will finish without much of an effort. But without testing your bike, if you start it, you don't know where the leakages will be, where the performance problems will be, then your journey is not going to be that comfortable. So that's how you need to consider. So your code is just one piece of the entire system. So there are things.
Satish, are you sharing something?
Forgot to share.
Okay. I thought you were just saying some normal thing. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
So first thing, before we understand this, that's why I told you why memory management. So these are all the part that they are given free. In Linux, there are a lot of options that you can optimize before you deploy your code. Ultimately, it is Linux, right? Whether you put it in cloud or not, it's Linux. So if you know those options, it will be beneficial, and then you can optimize your VMs. You can optimize your libraries for your own needs, and then you put your code. One thing, here you don't need any developer dependencies. Everything is free, because if you want to touch anything here, you need to talk to your manager, team leads, BAs, coordinate meetings. It is not going to work out actually. Okay, so you can get a lot of performance and memory improvement here itself. You can have value for your money. That's the whole important thing. That's a short term. On a long term, okay, so on a long term, why should I bother about performance, memory, all this nonsense? This is not necessary because I'm running in high level frameworks. But the thing is, I mean, I'm in this for 17 years actually. So now let us consider my career growth. Last 10 years, I'm just starting. Before 10 years, I started with a big service company. In that service company, I was doing, say for example, retail system. So what I did in that retail system is I was getting somewhere around some 14 lakhs per annum or whatever it is. That was my starting point. So, but for the 14 lakhs, what I was doing is, I was doing a Spring Boot application. Spring Boot was introduced at that point in time. So I was writing controller, and then service, and then repository. And then I went into another company for whatever it is. Now 16 to 17 or whatever it is. What I was doing is, again, I was doing controller service repository. Then another company, major IT major, controller service repository. I traveled to Singapore, and there also I did control service repository. Now let us consider this. Let us take it black and white. Okay. Let us consider what I was doing. My salary increased. My post increased, but this is what I was doing. Now let us consider why computer came into picture. Why we all have our jobs. We came when mechanical engineers were doing everything manually. We came and then said, boss, any redundant job, computer can do it for you. Now, for all our information, we are also doing a redundant job. And this is what AI or low code, no code, cloud, abstract, API first, or they are doing. So they are saying, boss, in computer also you are doing redundant work. We are going to take away that work. Now, where is this work is going to go? So what is it going to be the end of the software life, software engineer's life? No. So where the software engineer's quality is going to be valued in future is, everyone knows, even in low code, no code, your business person, your BA can sit and code, your customer can sit and code in low code and no code. But where it matters is how much efficiency that I will get. How do I get better value for my money? That is the place where we are going to have our value. And that is why it is very important for us, even in today's programmer, we are going reverse actually. We are learning Max. Max we forgot long time before, but we are learning Max to go to the A and all this stuff. But the point is, we are going back to make sure we cover our basics. That is, understanding basics of computer science, understanding basics of mathematics is all that is required now. It's like, no, your bell-bottom pant is coming again. Fashion repeats itself. That is why we need these aspects also to be taken care. So this is an agenda. If any doubts or anything, let me know. Okay. With that agenda, if everything is clear, we will get into the topic now. Okay. Okay. So,
Satish, one of the thing I want to add you here, that a lot of important thing you have said for the memory management. And I believe what you mentioned is that at the code point, it is very important for us to look into it. Okay. And, you know, with the time, actually, we have developed trillions of tools which look into memory management, like, you know, MAT and even normal GMCs and all do it. In fact, there is a lot of scope in this area, okay, because a lot of POCs were going on where you can have a bidirectional tools, right? Right now, currently, most of the tools are unidirectional. So you give your application to the tool or you give the dump to your tool, whatever it is. It is either you're doing live application analysis or postmortem analysis, depends upon that. And these tools actually do some analysis. Actually, they don't even use to do analysis. They will show you all the things and you used to do analysis and find it out that, okay, this area don't look good. Here the memory spike is higher, or here the memory is leaking out. Okay. In the last half a decade, we reached to a point where tools are doing excellent analysis for us. They are just can tell you that, okay, last week I showed you on the JMC, right? So the tools will tell you that, okay, this method is not good, this profiling is not good, there is a memory leak here. Now we are looking for a tool which is a bidirectional, and tool can also be controlling the application. Okay. And yes, both will be living in their sandbox, but if the user permits, they can control each other. So we were trying to work on something where, like, the tool will tell you the problem and tool will just give you a pop-out. You want to fix it. Okay. And when I will tell the tool to fix it, actually, it will fix the code or in the most trivial things, it will fix the configuration files. Okay. Like, you know, changing the XMS or setting up some parameters on the garbage collectors. So if someone who is interested in this, you should look into that. I mean, there is a lot of scope and a lot of future, because after having more machine learning and all those kind of things, this kind of tools will be the future in the next I think next half a decade or 1 decade. Yeah, that's the only point I want to add.
Yes, Vaibhav. In fact, yeah, I agree with you. Nowadays, that earlier the tools were used only for the advanced programming. Now they are also becoming more and more useful. So more and more usable, where everybody can make sense. In fact, Vaibhav showed me JMC. Honestly speaking, I was never looked into that tool, even though I have a lot of experience in Java. But when I started looking into it, I was thinking, come on, I should have known these tools earlier. So there's a lot of scope that if you take it as seriously, there's a lot of areas that you can set yourself and launch yourself a strong career around that itself. Yeah. So with that note, we will go to the problem statement. Okay. Why do we need this problem statement? Is anything that we learn, attach it to a real-time problem. Otherwise, it's very difficult. You'll just learn something and it will just pop out of your mind. So we are going to do some basic use case, very basic use case. The whole purpose of use case is the use case should be simple enough, and then the use case should be sufficient enough to feed all our what our memory management practices that we do. That's why we choose this use case. Before we go to the use case, I'll tell you what is the area that we are going to work on. So we are going to do our own parser basically. Can anyone tell me what are the JSON parsers that you are using in your project? The JSON parsers that we are using. We all know that JSON is a standard. It's a data exchange format.
Like we are in serialization.
Jackson to
Jackson, JSON.
We're on JSON.
Kotlin X is serialization I'm using.
So now there are just one question that pops up to our mind actually. Whenever I see there are some people who are using Sax, CJSON. There are plenty of other options also. But I mean, did we think anytime like, JSON is a standard basically. It's a data exchange format. That's it. Okay, it's going to carry your data. And data is a very important part actually. Without, if you don't know the data, I mean, probably we cannot do anything, but ultimately everything is around the data in software that we do. So now this data exchange format, there are other data exchange formats, Avro, gRPC. These are all the things that came with the limitation that we have in JSON that we saw in a different session sometime before. So now we'll focus on JSON. JSON is basically text-based data exchange format. Okay. Now JSON is a universal standard, but still we have a lot of libraries, even in Java. So ultimately, logically, if I think, okay, JSON is a concept like date, string, JSON is a format. So for that, there should be one Java class, like JSON Java, something library. Okay, but there are a lot of libraries actually. Jackson, JSON, RJSON, CJSON, JSON Simple. These are the popular libraries. There are other libraries in Java itself. Why there are plenty of libraries for just the one simple use case? Okay, now you can relate that with something very simple, collection frameworks. Okay, in collection, everything is mapped. We always use map means hash map, list means array list. I don't know how many of us look beyond this advanced collections and all this stuff, but this is what we do in collections now. Now, similar to that, JSON is also depends on the use case that we deal. For example, microservice is a different use case. For that, you need a separate set of algorithms and all this stuff. If you are looking at editor, it needs a separate set of algorithms, separate set of use cases. So based on the use cases, you choose your algorithm. Even though they all are JSON processing engines, these engines are customized for a specific need. To put a clarity, let us not go with the names actually, let us go with the category. Actually, Jackson, JSON, they come in one category. ArgJSON or JSON Simple, they come in another category. If you consider in microservices, if you are doing client and all this, most of the people who knows about the internals of this, they mostly prefer these two. Or if they don't read about this, they probably use JSON. Or sometimes, if you are going with Spring default, it will go with Jackson, because we don't care, everything is coming by default in Spring, we will use it as it is. But if you are using this in microservices or client, what is very important to use? You don't care about syntaxes. All that you care about is the data. You are going to extract the data, you are going to embed the data. That's it. That's all that you are going to do. So you are not going to check whether the open braces is there, closed braces is there, whether the token is closed correctly or not. In a simple sense, from the API producer side, you don't need to tell exactly where the problem is. You can say, okay, this JSON is rejected. This JSON is accepted. You don't need to give any reasoning it out saying that this is why I'm rejecting it. It is none of your business. If anybody has any questions on this, let me know. Okay. So if you are sending an invalid JSON, it's going to say invalid. That is sufficient. You don't need to say in the 200th line, 300th character, you have this problem. That is none of the business for server. Okay. So that's a feature. That's a great feature, but you don't need it in the server side. Okay. Let us consider this Jackson and JSON. They are too good. They have their own use cases, everything. And they are feature rich. You do object mapping. JSON is not just straightforward data exchange, actually. You can use this for data exchange, configuration files, or you can use the JSON path. What is the use case of JSON path? Object mapper, JSON path. In data engineering, we use JSON path, right?
It's like SQL. It's basically like SQL.
Yeah. The JSON path we are using in the networking related to exchange data between two different servers, I think.
Yeah. So when you are exchanging it, you want to check the contact whether this flag is set. You don't want to read it.
This is a lightweight format comparison to XML.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, JSON path is nothing but it's like data validations and all those stuff where you want to check certain parameters of your full JSON. You will go by the path and then fetch a specific or a group of elements. It's similar to the selectors that we have in browser technologies. So these are all the things that is provided by Jackson and JSON, but we don't need all these features when we are developing just a microservice or simple clients where we send the data, we get the data. So now the use case that we are going to put is, we are going to build a JSON parser, which is going to be used for a specific purpose in microservices or REST clients, where they will just simply do data exchange, data extraction and data embedding. That's it. They are not going to do anything. So by nature, when you are not doing certain things, you need to be optimized with your memory as well as performance. This is what we are going to do. So we are going to build a JSON from the scratch, and then we are going to optimize the memory, optimize performance. So which part that we'll start? We'll start with the optimizing memory part or performance part, which is the right part when you are going to implement the JSON parser. What is first? What comes first? Should we worry about memory? Should we worry about performance?
Memory. It is about performance.
I think performance.
Okay.
I think it's basically dependent on your use case.
Okay.
Right. I mean, you can choose to do, if you have lots of memory, then you want performance optimizations.
Okay.
Or if you're okay with some explosion.
Yeah. Okay. In fact,
can't we worry about both of it?
Very good. Okay. So to an extent, okay, this is the same mistake that I also had. Okay. We discussed about we are going to implement JSON parser. Okay. Now we cannot say that by implementing a new JSON parser, I'm going to break your JSON parsing logic. First of all, functionality should be covered. Let us complete the functionality. Let us bother about memory and performance later. So accuracy comes first, because the importance of JSON parser is this JSON parser is where we are going to fit this JSON parser. If you are putting in a Spring Boot application, very simple. Any request that you make is not going to escape this logic. Any request will come through this logic. Any response will go through this logic, which means it puts us at the place where you cannot fail. So first thing that you want to save is forget about memory, forget about performance, make sure it is accurate. We need to guarantee that this JSON is not going to break. If there is a JSON that you are giving, it's a valid JSON, it is going to give you the valid response. If you are giving an invalid JSON, it is going to give an invalid response. That you need to make sure. So in general, optimizing the memory and performance before even you're completing the algorithm, that is not a good practice. First, complete your functionalities and tweak your algorithm to meet better performance memory. That's how it actually works. So now for a moment, I'm going to put this as a second scope. I'm going to make sure that my accuracy is first. Now here comes I'm going very slow. Sorry for that, but I just want to make sure that we cover each and every one of the strategies. Even though it's a small component, there are a lot of computer science practices that comes into picture. Now, if I want to make sure it is accurate, obviously we need to follow something called TDD. TDD is a word that I hate. It's not good always, but in certain cases it is good, especially when you do something like a JSON parser error where failure is not an option to you. TDD makes all the sense. So we are going to put TDD in practice now. Let us start with that.
Vaibhav, I have one question to you. What is gRPC to comparison to this JSON? Which one is better? These are JSON.
Okay, it's not about which one is better again. So in software, nothing is best. It's all best fit. Okay, so gRPC or Avro are new generation frameworks where they are used for service to service communication. JSON is actually text-based. It has its own performance problems actually. You cannot establish a contract also, it is freestyle. And that is a place where gRPC and Avro and all those things comes into picture. So if you are making service to service call or IoT calls, right, gRPC scores better. Okay. But it's very easy. In a simple sense, consider this, okay? If your application is going to be hit from the browser, in the browser, okay, and which is the one that is, okay, let me put it. Okay. So there is Bengali movies, there is Hollywood movies, there is Malayalam movies. Okay.
Sorry, Satish, one small thing. See, Avro, we can say just similar to that one, XSD file is right. So based on XSD file, we are derive XML. If we are give anything wrong in XML file, if we compare with XSD file, it will pay validation. Similarly, Avro kind of a framework. If I design any JSON schema should be fit into the Avro. Otherwise, it will fail. Am I correct, or did I miss anything?
Yeah, basically, underlying Avro is a binary protocol. So the IO size, everything, right? They are very optimized. Your serialization time, deserialization.
No, I am not asking about serialization and serialization.
Yeah, apart from that, they have this JSON
schema validation.
Yes. Okay. Yeah, okay. You should be you will be knowing what is coming in. So there's always an advantage, right? So for example, if I'm giving you something that you don't even know what is coming in, there is certain level of suspect that you will put. But if you know what is coming in, right, you can go a little faster. Correct. Yeah. Okay. Consider that is JSON schema. In JSON schema, you put upfront saying that I'm not going to get ABCD JSON document. I'm going to get a document for product, which will have product title as a string, product ID as a number, and all the structures upfront. So it will be easier. And that is applicable to gRPC also. But in general, the practical applicability is for anything that comes from browser or mass audience, then it is always better to use JSON. If it is coming from internal resources like IoT or service-to-service communications, when you make the clean calls and all those stuff, right? These kind of technologies, Avro and gRPC, they are too good. They will save a lot of your performance-related issues actually. JSON is not good actually for that service-to-service communication, by the way. But unfortunately, that is not an option for us. We need to go with it for many of the legacy applications. And that is the place where these kind of approaches that we discussed today will be useful. Yeah. So we'll go with practical TDD. Now I want to write the test cases. We know that how complex that writing a JSON parser. It's going to be really difficult. We'll have hundreds of corner cases actually. It's not easy. So we will start developing test cases with all the contract testing, API testing, integration testing, unit testing, all this testing principles in picture. Will that solve my TDD? No. TDD is not, test-driven development is not about adding more test cases. Running for more hours for your test cases is going to guarantee a better results. Actually, it is going to give you the worst results possible if you're applying TDD in that way. Okay. So we need to find a quality and less quantity and good quality and less number of test cases, less lines of test cases is what we should focus about. Ultimately, the test case measurement comes from how many cases that it can catch, how many cases that you can escape from your case, your test case. That's all that comes. Okay. Now I'm going to put a simple test case. This particular logic that we are going to talk about is not going to be a huge set of test cases. All that we have is just one test case. That's it. One class, one test case is sufficient enough to write JSON parser. So the logic is very simple. What we are going to do is, we will see that in the code also. Shortly I will show the code, but I'll put the mind map so that when you see the code is just an expression. So we'll see that later. But the idea is, we are going to get a string or a string file JSON, JSON or JSONs. Okay. So now we are going to put it in Jackson. Jackson gives me a JSON node. Okay, I keep this as a first level. Okay, then we are going to pass this JSON to our engine, which will give you a hash map. So you get the map passed to Jackson, and pass to Jackson, get a string, get a JSON string out of Jackson. And again, you repeat Jackson to pass the string, reverse string, right? Only thing is that reverse string is passed to Jackson and JSON node is written. If this equal to this, then we are done. That's all that we are going to do. If we can implement that as case, we don't need to implement, you spend days and nights of it. So I'll show that glimpse of it, we'll go that later. But the test case, that to understand what we are going to talk about is, see, these are all the places. This is the folder where I can keep all my JSON. I put all the crazy JSON, empty array, multi-line without any data, array of empty array, or whatever corner cases. So this project crossed that level, so that we crossed it, but ultimately we put all this. So what happens in our test cases? We are just running only one test case. So it runs it, it compares, it takes one file, make one node, make another node, compares each other, gets the results. That's it. So it says accurate, your parser is good. And I don't need any more test cases. If this guy says it is good, it is good. That's the level that we reach. So practical way of applying TDD is in such a way that never ever go with an assumption that more test cases, more runtime, more running time of test cases. Running time of test cases will give you anything. It will not give you anything. It will actually give you nightmares only. That's the only thing that it can give. But TDD is done. Now in that case, I made sure I actually guaranteed for my accuracy. So the algorithm that we are seeing, it's accurate. We'll go through the algorithm also now shortly. You can explore it directly. And now comes whether you are going to optimize memory or performance. Okay. There's a different school of thought actually. Okay. It varies between these two. It's very, very difficult. When you are going to optimize memory or performance. This is just my feeling. Between these two, I would recommend to use memory as a first level, performance as a second. Focus on memory first. Because by default, if you are optimizing your memory, you are naturally going to get some performance that you can see it visibly. That I will show you now. Okay. Now, this is the place where the TDD reaches its limitations. Okay, TDD till now you are exploring for functionality. Okay, functional device, the algorithm that we put, it was actually working fine. But now I need to measure the performance. I need to measure the memory also. Of course, JMC kind of a tools, they are going to give me a lot of things that I need, that I don't even need because they are specific for certain use cases. But in my case, I'm very, very simple. Okay, I am going to create a JSON in memory. How much memory Jackson takes, how much memory JSON takes, how much memory the target.json takes. That's all that I'm going to measure. How much running time that Jackson takes, how much running time that other libraries take, that's all that I'm going to measure. Okay, in order to do this, performance is slightly straightforward. Okay, I'm going to put a report just to move on because the logic is important. So I'm going to put the test cases rollback to keep it in a level that it is already in. But I'll just show you how this actually runs. Okay, now when I'm running these test cases, you know that accuracy is guaranteed. So we don't care about accuracy. We are going to the next level where anything that you want to measure, you should see it visibly. Now see, this is actually complaining. Why is it complaining? Is we need to know this. Running time you can calculate easily. That is, you can take it as a nanosecond. Also in Gleason Java, you can measure by nanosecond. Nanosecond you can measure. But Java will not let this memory goes out. It will not give that memory information to everybody by default. Okay, in order to ask Java to give you this kind of information, they will not give you directly to the application developer. They don't trust this application developer, but they trust the agents. They trust the brokers. Okay, so what is this agent? Is there is a topic called Java instrumentations. That's a topic of its own size. But basically, you can deploy agents. Agents are the one which collects these matrices. Even in your production cases, this Grafana, all these tools that we are talking about, where you measure your JVM related items and all those stuff, right? They are all done through the agents. Now I'm going to deploy one specific agent. And I'm not going to use, as an application developer, I have a very simple thing in mind. I will not move my IDE, whatever benefit that I have, whatever that I want to do, whether it is Git or whatever it is, I will stay within my IDE. So for that luxury also we will give now. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to measure my memory. How do I measure my memory? I'm going to use a library called JAMM, Java Application Memory Measurer is the library name, but it works as the agent. So I'm going to add this agent. So this agent will measure my memory now. So all that I need to do is I need to attach this guy to my JVM. So here I'm using IDEA, so I'm attaching that here. And one more thing, this is for JVM. After Java 11, you need to open, because this is Java module system, right? It will not open everything. So for the agent, if you're running in Java 8, you don't need to put these properties. It's just enough to put the agent alone. But if you are running in Java 11 or after, you need to put this. You need to specifically say that I want to open up certain things. Okay. So now with that, I'm going to run. Let us see the final results. So here you go. So it clearly says nothing is I'm just saying that it is 2x, 3x performance. We don't need to do that. It's an open source project. We are doing it for fun. So let us take as it is. What are the numbers? These are the numbers. Okay, we'll analyze the numbers. We'll find something very, very interesting even from the application developer perspective. Even if you don't think too much about performance, you will see some very small changes that will make drastic changes to these numbers that you see. Okay, just to explain. So here it says memory. It says memory wise. It says how much of memory it is occupying. As we are occupying how many memory, and this guy is occupying minus. So which means he occupies less memory compared to us. And Jackson is occupying less memory compared to us. JSON is occupying more memory compared to us to hold your JSON data. So Jackson stored it as a JSON node. JSON stored it as a JSON object. RJSON also, it has its own class called a JSON object. So that's how they store. But this is a memory representation. And when it comes to performance, we are minus 16% slower than ArgJSON. We are minus 39% slower than Jackson. We are 77% faster than JSON. That's what it shows. This number will keep varying. Okay, so you can guarantee that next time it will be 77. Performance and memory, you cannot guarantee. That's a tricky part. Okay, next time we are going slower also. So you can just take an average that we'll see later. Okay, so now we are going to improve these numbers. That's all that we are going to do. Now let us take one by one. How are we going to optimize? Before I go to optimization phase, let us understand how this algorithm works. Okay, this algorithm that we are going to talk about is not algorithm. In fact, it is not a project. To be honest, it is just a program. JSON parser is just a program. It's not a library. We'll do it easily. Okay, so this is the ArgJSON source code that I'm sharing with you. So this is the source code. This is the by far the smallest available JSON parser, but it has plenty of classes. But these are all the JSON related items. But in our case, as we don't do a lot of stuff. In our case, the source code is even smaller. We are just having only one class. This is the only one class that I'm going to have. Okay. So now let us look at how this actually parsing works. Let us take a very simple case. We'll go very quickly. This is bigger JSON, Boolean JSON, object JSON. Okay. Let us take this case. Take all this complex size. We want to get into the simple format. Okay. Now very simple. Okay. So ultimately JSON is a text. Whether you take it, read them as a JSON, Java object, .NET object, C object, or whatever it is, but they are ultimately text. It's up to you to make it to your native whatever objects that you want to cover. Okay. So now here it has key value pairs, right? So keys are always a string. Okay. In JSON, it's very simple. JSON is not a complex type. All that it has is only 4 data types. If I miss anything, let me know. Okay. There is something called null. There is something called true. There is something called number, string. These are all the basic data types. It's not going to support date. It is not going to support lat long. That and all is not there. These are all the things that you need to make your dates and all those stuff only with these limited combinations. And then you will have this composites called objects, or you can have arrays. And you are going to have nested objects, nested arrays, and all those stuff. Am I missing anything? Yes. There's something called false. Okay. Do we miss anything here? These are all the data types that JSON supports. Okay. Now, simple logic. If it is you are going to look into the first. Okay. Now we are going to deal with streams. These data that you see are not strings in real time. In your Spring Boot application or Quarkus, any web application that you see, they come as streams, which means you can read only character by character. You don't know what is coming in. You know what is currently available. You don't know what is coming next. That makes this really challenging and interesting. Okay. So we are not going to deal with strings where you can go back, you can go forward, you can go back. That is not option. You can just go back, you can go forward. You cannot look backwards actually. Okay. So with that limitation, now the logic is, it is going to check whenever you want to read an object. There's only one method that it is going to give you. Okay. It's going to give you this read method. So in case if the file contains a string, it will give you a JSON string. It's a Java string. So one thing that we made sure is, in order to optimize it, we are not going to return any customized JSON objects. No, we are going to return a plain, simple Java native objects. So native representation of JSON. What is a native representation of a JSON? It is actually map. It's basically map of string of object. What is the natural data type of arrays in JSON? Is it list or set? Which is a natural representation of JSON arrays? Any guess? Is it list or set?
List.
Okay, why not set? That's also array,
right? Duplicate it. Maybe sometimes you will give array of duplicate data, right?
Is it array that determines whether it's a list or set?
JSON array can contain duplicates.
Yeah, it can contain duplicate, but the duplicate is not about set and list, right?
Also, ordering is important.
Exactly. Good point. So we are going to have an ordered collection, right? No, we cannot break the order. Okay, whether they are going to retain the order in the JSON data, it doesn't matter. But we cannot break the rule. By default, we need to maintain the order. It's up to the receiving party to keep it whatever way that you want. Because in some cases, right, when you send sequence of numbers in sequence of records in arrays, right, you cannot break that sequence. So safety bet is list. Set will perform faster, I think, because they don't maintain order. But actually, we can live only with the list. So we are going to do with list. Okay. So this is all that we are going to do. Simple. Okay. If you're passing a string, it will give you a string, number, JSON number, map, list, Boolean. No intermediate format. And this is very important. The reason being, in data exchange, if you don't do it, actually you will do two transformation. We don't want to do two transformation. We get map, push the map. And there's an advantage of keeping native, because if you are keeping native, all the advantages of lambda, streams, parallelisms, all that will come without any cost. This is the point that I told at the beginning, that knowing these tools, knowing JVM in detail, knowing Spring Boot in detail, knowing collection in detail will give you an advantage where you don't need to depend on your own piece of software that you're writing. You can get maximum out of your own engine itself. So now by keeping it native, we decided to keep it native. By keeping it native, we are going to yield the benefits later. That we'll see later, not today. We'll see that later after other sessions also. So now that's the idea. Okay, with that idea, we are going to use only one method. It's not complex, library, learning, cycle, and all this stuff. Okay, so ultimately it gets into a content extractor. Content extractor is the one which gets the reader, and then reader is the one which this Java reader is the Java IO reader. This reader is Java IO reader, so you can pass your streams and then you're going to get. Okay, so it's going to get into the get value. Logic is very, very simple. It will just go open the first character, look at the first characters. Okay, now if it sees that open braces, it is going to consider that it is an object, go and fetch an object. If it is going to have this, then it is going to get a string. If it is going to get n, it is going to be null. If it is going to be t, true, f, false, open brace, it's an array. And this is a tricky part that I'll see later. Today's session, I will not explain that. That's a different part actually. So now this, if anything doesn't fit, put it as a number. check it with a number. Okay. Now, before we go to the complex part, let us go to this null, true, and all those stuff. Okay. With null, true, everything, it's very, very easy. You don't need to. This is another Java IO in detail. If you see, there is a lot of methods. Read. That is what we will be covering in IO most of the time. Read, just plain simple read. There is a cost to that. For example, if you are looking at the Java IO reader, most of the time we tend to, when we need to read character by character, right?
But is not supported asynchronous the Java IO.
Yeah, that's what I'll come to. The asynchronous is also will come, but before we go to asynchronous, also there is another part there. So these readers are your outside resources, right? Whenever Java deals with internal objects, it can deal with comfort. Okay, when it deals with something outside, where you are getting a file from outsiders, it will put a lot of safety checks. Okay, so these are all the native methods, by the way. Okay, now there is different methods. Read. This is what we use. It read one character. So in most of the places you see for string everything, we read one by one. But in one specific case, we read using this method. That is the third method. Read by character buffer. Okay, so why we read by character buffer is every time, whether you are coming to read for a single character or multiple character, if you go to the source code of this this one, see, this is abstract, by the way, it will put lot of safety checks. It will check whether it will do something called ensure open. There's a lot of safety checks that it will do. So better, whenever you go to the file, if you know that you are going to read certain characters, read it upfront, store it in a buffer, and then you do whatever that you want to do later. And that's why for Boolean, we know that it is going to be TRUE, or it is going to be FALSV, or it is going to be NULL. We read them directly. So these are all the good people. These are all very excellent good people. They don't harm you. They give you all the flexibility of going faster. Okay. But the real complexity starts from this. Okay. Any JSON parser that you want to evaluate, or anything related to parser, just keep in mind. It's very, very simple. Just keep this picture alone in mind. There are three people who are the main problem makers here. Okay. One side, I'm starting from the right. So there is strings, because strings are not straightforward, right? Strings can be Unicode, strings can be multi-language, strings can have escape characters. So you need to make sure you read them carefully, character by character, understand them. That's a problem. Okay, that's a problem with strings. Okay. Now the other problem in the middle that we have is number. Okay, number. What is the problem with number? Number is just a number, right? But the problem is number as long as you get a number. But actually, as we discussed here, everything that you are going to get, it is not number. It is going to be text. It is going to be strings. So there is a conversion process. We simply call integer a parser, but there is a considerable amount of effort that has to go to calculate what is that number. Okay, how do I multiply it to 10 to the power of whatever it is? If you know that, if you remember that basic C programming that we did, character to number itself is an algorithm. Okay, there is an algorithm related item that goes on. Okay, so but the third character is very, very interesting. Okay, the third character is an external guy. Okay, he doesn't even know about your internal family problems and all those stuff. That's how you need to keep the JSON parser. Consider JSON parser is a family affair. Okay, so you can fight with each other strings numbers. That's up to you. But the problem is, bottom line, every time you read a character here, so it's like this, right? When you get a file, you read this guy, okay, do some logic, read this guy, do some logic, read, do some logic, do some logic, do some logic, do some logic, do some logic. Okay. Now it's like, you know, that Aparajita or Onion film that you see, right? Where 5 paise is not costly, but if you're stealing 5 paise from 100 people, it looks like costly. If you're stealing 5 paise from 100 crore people, it is really, really costly. Same way, the logic that you put, that do something, can do something that your application can go down or can go slower. Okay. Now we need to make sure that if you get a reader, you need to release him very, very fast. And that is the one place that JSON is too good, that we'll see later when we see the measurements. So the earlier that you release IO, the better that it is good for your performance. Okay. Now we go to that string part. So string part and the number part is a complex part where we say, in string, we need to check for this escape characters and all those stuff. In numbers, we get that numbers, check everything. And then ultimately we get this number, no? We get this big number and then we do it, okay? Now, where will we start the optimization? Okay, we are talking about this use case algorithms. We have taken time. So now we will see this. Yes, this code is in GitHub. I'll share it actually. Okay, so now we'll go to the detailed memory related things, okay? We have all the TDD covered. So we are good to, if you don't have follow TDD, better don't do performance or memory, because sometimes it can affect the functionality also. Now we have everything set. Now I'm going to improve this memory. We'll look at some real good aspects. Okay. This arg JSON it's not just outperforming us. It is outperforming everybody with a large margin, right? So now by looking at this number, so the way that this test case is running is showing the difference, but it is not showing the actual memory that these guys are taking. Now let us look at this actual memory that these guys are taking, okay? So now how do I do that? I will go to my test case. I'm just going to make a small change where my measurement, I'm not going to put as no difference. Rather, I'm going to put the actual numbers. How do we put the actual number? Get size display. I put the gap here, right? But I'm going to put the size directly. Okay, I'm not going to put this one. We will see something very, very interesting. This arg.json is performing. So everybody occupies, if you put 10 strings, it occupies 10 strings memory. If you put 20 strings, it occupies 20 strings memory. That's how Jackson and JSON behaves. But this arg.json, no, it's a magician. He says, you give me even 100 page of document. I don't care. I will occupy only 64-bit. How this magic is happening? Any guess? You give large volume of records, you give small JSONs. I don't care. I will just occupy 64-bit.
Yeah,
we are setting the some like limit.
Yeah, it will only process X amount of data at a time.
Exactly. Okay. Now we will see that. Okay. Now we will see that in practice. Anything that we want to learn, right? Let us make a practice. We are going to see it and believe it. Okay. We are not going to test by what he says. Okay. He says, okay, I actually did the so and so and all that stuff. But the thing that you will notice is if I'm accessing it, it will change that memory from 64 to 84. So what it is doing is it will not occupy the memory directly. It will just read that, keep a note that, okay, this is all that is available. And then when you ask for it, at that point in time only, it will go and fetch that specific value and load it to the memory. And that is why it's very useful for a very lower footprint. When we started itself, we were discussing, right? When you are doing something memory critical and all those stuff, you can use and not a general purpose JSON parser. For example, JSON is used widely for Android applications, object mappers and all those stuff. Jackson is used widely for enterprise related feature. They offer plenty other than just JSON parsing. In that case, you can use that. But for smaller footprint kind of things, arg.json outperforms other people for this simple reasons. Okay, now that is one. Now going to the memory optimization. Okay, we are going to do 2 memory optimization. Point number 1. Now you'll see that it will have the better memory actually. Now as I reverted, it actually put that thing also. 2 things that you'll notice. Okay. Now let us look at how do I optimize. Someone asked about this constant pools just some time before, right? So let us look at this nature of JSON. Okay. So now even if you have, say for example, you are running a system where you have you are inviting product JSON, you are inviting product JSONs. I'll just put that product JSON here. You tell me what is where do we see that score of we'll add some optimization after this. So now I'm going to have product JSON. So I'm going to have ID number 1, title, Apple, iPhone. Now I'm going to have another record. So there is lakhs of rows of records are coming in. I'm going to have ID, iPhone, Android, iPhone or Android, OnePlus. Like this we are going to have. So what is common between these people?
JSON keys.
Exactly. Okay. Now we need to take advantage of that, right? We know that, okay, we're going to deal only with JSON. And JSONs are going to be having JSONs are not just simple maps, right? They have certain good parts, additional parts. That additional part is they are going to have only string as a key and then only 5 set of values. That's one good part. And the second part is, if you look at in detail, these keys that you see are repetitive. I don't need to keep them, create them again and again in memory. And I want to do this optimization where I'm going to retain their creation again and again in singleton, whatever it is. What is the best option that I have in get keys? So here you are going to get keys. So you are going to get keys.
Basically, Satish, what the benefit we are trying to utilize is that most applications interact based on an interface contract. Some kind of contract exists between applications. Because that contract exists, we can reuse or take benefit of that contract and reduce our memory overhead for the parser.
Yes. So now by knowing that what is coming, do we see anything different here? Anything strange in this get key? And it is just that one small change that makes all the difference.
Intern.
Okay. What is that intern will do?
It
It will store it in the intern pool of JVM.
Exactly. Intern is a native string pool. Okay. So it is going to guarantee that if you are creating product ID or product title, this is not going to be this is not going to be two different strings created in memory. They will just retain this. This small change alone can save plenty of your memory, because in practice, you are going to have this spread across all your JSONs. Okay. Now let us see whether it is actually working. Let us not trust this Java doc and all those stuff. Let us see it to believe it. Let us see which JSON, array.json, right? Array.json or number.json. Let us put one test case where I'm saying file string hyphen pool JSON. I'm going to put this in an array. Now I'm going to JSON test. Okay. Now path is number.json. Skip it. String pool. Okay. Now let us get our JSON object. This is our JSON object, right? Let us read that. It will give you a map. This is our JSON object. Now let us look at it. Collection number 1. That is your first record. ID. Where do you see whether it is used the same? Okay. Now this key is ID, right? ID. This is 2967. Okay. That's from memory. Now you go to ID key 2967. It's the same thing. Now a question, interesting question. Okay. What we just did, is it a memory related benefit or a performance related benefit? Did we improve the performance just now or we improve the memory now?
Both.
Both. Why?
Because to pass it again.
You avoid a new operator.
New operator.
Is there any other benefits post loading the data? I'm talking about, okay, you loaded the data. After that, you are going to read the data. While reading the data, is there any benefit? You are going to read the data from a hash map. I'll give you a clue also. And in order to read from a hash map, you are going to call map.get with the key. And at that point in time, will there be any benefits?
Referring to same.
So it will refer to the same key and the reading. So it won't make an extra search, since that already is there. It's stored only once. That key is stored only once. So that will be the only reference. So that searching time also will be reduced a bit.
Okay. Okay. We'll go with one of the basic interview questions that we'll often have. While comparing two strings, you need to compare with equal to operator or dot equals.
Dot equals.
Why dot equals?
It will compare the hash code.
This equal to will compare only the reference. It will not compare anything else. As long as they are same memory object, it will say, okay, it is equal to. It will not look at the value. But actually strings, if Sadish is given in two strings, you need to check whether S starts with capital letter A, T, H, I, S, H. Then only you will say, okay, these are equal. Now, whenever you call a get method from your map, right, your dot equals will be called. When you call a dot equals, first it will check. Whenever you call dot equals, it will first check whether these two are, equal to same references. If not, then it will search value by value. Now, by making sure these are all two same references, every time you do a read call, it will just come quickly out of the loop, because it will say, okay, equal to, because reference itself are equal to. And that is why you tend to have better performance. Am I making sense?
Here to compare two strings, equal is enough, because we are using intern.
Exactly. Because by doing this intern, right? So now look at this intern. By doing intern, if you look at the Java doc says this itself will be true. Yes, equal to intern. I'm not highlighting. Yeah, I'm not highlighting. Okay. So now you see the highlighted text, right? So by any chance, if you are comparing this with this, it is going to be same reference. So equal to itself will be sufficient, and that's an advantage of using this. Okay, so this is why I'm saying memory optimization will give you a natural performance benefit. We will do it in the actual use case itself. We will see with the numbers also now. Okay, now with numbers, we actually had an irresponsible get number where all that it did is, if you remember the old code that I had, it was actually calling to get a number. It said, okay, go to new big integer of your whatever string that you have, and it was returning that. Why do we do that is, in Java, you have a lot of different classes to represent number, a small number, big number. That's the place where we went to know really any number that you give, it will occupy the space of big integer. So that's the place where we apply that kind of A and ML optimization. So what is A and ML optimization is, you need to add some if else loop. So this I'm going to add now. So only after I add it, let us see that get number method now. So if you look at that get number, so it was getting an irresponsible get number earlier. Now I reverted, so it put that responsible item. So we'll put this check. So what is this check is guaranteeing is, it is making sure that your numbers are held or placed in proper container. Now, if the number is between 2 digits, you can safely put it in get bytes. Sorry, in bytes. If number is less than 4 characters, then you can put it in chart. Is that going to guarantee that we are going to put it in a proper bucket? Actually, this algorithm has a small flaw. How do we differentiate between byte and numbers? Yeah, please go ahead.
We are missing decimal logic.
Decimal is different. Yeah, decimal, of course, decimal also we need to look at it. But most importantly, is it the number of characters that decides whether the number size is like, it comes within byte or something, or within chart or something. Every time you see the number, right? Number itself is a base class actually. There are a lot of people who override a number. For example, now let us look at this number. Now, if you look at the number, right? Number is implemented by so many people. Okay, we are not talking about atomic, that we'll cover once we go to concurrency. But the data holder wise, big integer, byte, double, and all those stuff. Now let us look at byte. Asking, okay, what is the maximum value byte that you can handle, or what is the maximum value that an integer can handle? It's not by digits. If you look at it, maximum value is this, minimum value is this. How is this value is calculated? It is based on -2 of so and so, some that 31 or something. What is this 31? This 2 to the power of 31. Or if you look at short, or look at short min value, max value, it is 2 to the power of 15. What is this 15 or 31 means?
Number of bits.
Exactly. So number of bits we cannot calculate because it's a string data. Okay, but what we are safely assuming is, okay, if you look at it by that level, right, in the get byte level, the byte is actually taking bytes maximum value is 127. Okay, so on a simpler sense, first we calculate, okay, whether this byte is less than 3 digits. In case of less than 3 digits, we are 100% sure that it can be occupied within the byte. We'll put in the byte. Okay, but in case if it is having the 3rd digit, we have the dilemma, right? In that dilemma also, it's very easy to solve. What we do is go to the short. Before you return a short, we will check whether the short is something lesser than the byte min value, or it is something, so whether it is greater than the byte min value or it is less than the byte max value. In case if it is coming in that bucket, you will say, okay, short, please give it as a byte. So this is why we play responsibly with memory. We'll say, okay, I will occupy memory only what is required. Why this is very, very important. It is not required even when we are doing at the level of application development and all those stuff, it is not required. But if you're doing it IoT or you're writing your own framework where all the data that you get is JSON and all this are loaded to memory. So make sure that you do optimization right at the right level. If you can save 2 bytes here, it can be 200 bytes at the end results. And that, this is not the end. We will go through a lot of other optimization also. As Vaibhav covers this memory management, we will try to bring in all the other aspects also. But the whole idea of this introduction to JSON parser today is, there are tools like, this source code is available. You can just simply clone it, run it. It will run directly without any issues. So you can put that debugger and then check whatever that is happening behind the screen also. I will keep optimizing. There are still a lot of things that I have not optimized, but the code wise, it will remain as only one class and one test case class. It will not exceed beyond that. That is what I'm seeing. We'll keep optimizing that. You can give your feedbacks also. So this will give you an idea about how to set up the tools. So the tool that we used is Java memory. So this is a tool that I was using, Java application measurement, Java agent for memory measurement. Okay, so in order to set this, you need to set this agents. We will cover the remaining tools also in detail. I got a very interesting reference from our Java user group itself. So one person sent me something called Grow Root, I think. Grow Root. Grow root. Okay, I will be exploring this also next session. We'll cover that. But we need to make sure that whatever that you learn, you see it visibly. We will try to cover that also in the next session. That's the idea. Any doubts so far?
These are all memory analyzing.
Yes. So we will see a lot of tools to measure whatever memory that it takes. First, we will measure at the very basic classes level. Once we go through that, once we are clear with this, right, we will measure at the application level. We will take a Spring Boot application or a Quarkus application, we will measure it and then we will optimize it through that. But to optimize at that level, there are some optimization that you should be knowing at the bottom. That's what this will give you an overall idea. So hope things are clear. This source code is available in GitHub also. That link is already available. You can clone it, run it. Any issues, let me know. And this idea, I started from Souvik actually. Thanks to Souvik because he validated this idea of implementing this. And whatever memory optimization that I did, Vaibhav helped me a lot. And there are 2 more people from Java user group who helped me, Haripriya and Manikanta. Thanks all for that. Thanks guys. That's all from my side, Vaibhav.
So this Java agent, that jam is comes as a jar file, and we have to add that in as a part of our build, right? To do this to measure the memory.
Yes, Sankar. So it's a jar file. Okay. Only difference is this all comes under the topic Java instrumentation, right? So in order to do that instrumentation, your jars needs to be attached right at the time when you start your this one process, JVM process. So for example, now when you do this Maven test, right? One part that you can observe here, I'll just show you. You start with the agent, right? You need to attach them first. You need to attach it as part of your VM properties.
Okay.
Then
so environment variables, you have to add that.
Yes. This
is not your part of your application, right?
This will not?
It's not a part of application, right? It's run when you are running your application.
It's no way part of our application. If you are attaching them, they can actually get the details on behalf of you from JVM. Otherwise, JVM will not give these information, memory related information.
Okay, is there any compatibility of with which version of JDK this will work?
Mostly before Java 8, all the agents will work straightforward. Actually, you will not face any problem. Only after Java, it's not a problem. Actually, you need to explicitly give access to these agents. Agents are sensitive, right? So you need to give this add opens. You see in my screen, add opens. I have added, right?
Yeah.
That you need to give. Apart from that, it will work with any JDK. This instrumentation is there for long time.
Okay. Thanks.
And one more thing for analyzing, currently that JFR is there, Java Flight Recording.
That we will see in the next session. That is too good a tool that everybody should be knowing. But before we go to that level, right, this is just an introduction of tools.
Okay. And these Glow Root and JMM will come into that category?
Yes.
Like, okay.
Actually speaking, this is a very interesting question. Thanks. So when you talk about tools, right? I mean, for frameworks or libraries, you are going to have a commitment to that, right? So you need to be very, very careful whether I'm going to, as an organization, I'm going to take Quarkus as my framework, Spring Boot or Scala or whatever it is. But when it comes to tooling, right, you're not committed. So it's better, don't go by just Glow Root or something like that. You want to inspect, right? Give you all the inspectors the access. Ask some of your teammates to use JWC, it's okay. Ask some of your people to use Glow Root, it's okay. It's like IDE. So that's why we explore all this because for example, Glow Root is a recently made library. So obviously, if someone is doing something recently, there is a case that he or she might have seen that is not there in the existing one. Correct?
Yeah.
That is why it's better we see all the tools. We see ultimately we need information about our application. And if anybody is giving it for free, we will go and ask him, okay, tell me what you think. The tools, you can keep learning all the tools also. As of now, we don't know which will give you every information. There are some enterprise related things, licensed items. Licensed item, not everybody can afford. But even if you are not willing to pay that license, But if you can pay attention and pay time, then there is a lot of open source. Glory to open source.
Okay, and one more doubt, like for JFR, can we see like on which piece of code where the memory leak is happening based on taking stats by running the application repetitively?
I think we can do. In fact, Vaibhav is an expert in that. I'll let Vaibhav to cover that in detail when he takes the next.
Satish, yes, I will just show you. May not be very true for the real life, but I think you will be able to figure it out. So Satish, if you permit, I can share my screen.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, so sorry, I missed the person who has asked me this question. So let me show you. I mean, generally, I run demos. Okay, so these demos are still available. First, we used to demo these with, I mean, we used to ship JDK with these demos, but now being more memory conscious, that we are not shipping it, but you can anytime download this. Okay, so what I will do is that I'm running a simple UI application in Java, which yeah.
I had one question to you. Actually, I have some data is IoT data is there in my server, and the end client is one of the Raspberry Pi is there. That RAM size is only of 5 MB. How can you work these JSON parsing in that Raspberry Pi? Is any occurred? Is maybe OOM errors? How can you solve this one?
I believe the question was that you want to run a few of the JSON on the Raspberry Pi.
Yeah, yes. In the DB related is there in backend. I want to connect the DB and convert into JSON. That the parts in JSON in the my Raspberry Pi, because of I using some vision related and NLP related task in the edge device. But my RAM size is very less. How can garbage collect and internally working, and which challenge I faced this one? How can I resolve this one?
Oh, related to garbage collector. So
yeah,
I have a Raspberry Pi in the home. I mean, in the office I had. So if you will tell me, I can show you. Maybe when the office will get open, we deploy the complete Java SC. That means the complete JDK tool on the Raspberry Pi. The garbage collector works, the JIT compiler works, everything works perfectly fine onto the Raspberry Pi. Okay, so you really don't have to worry about that. What is the RAM size? Okay, the JDK or the JVM ergonomics will automatically take care of all those things. Okay. So basically, we know that what is the device, the underlying device you are running, and accordingly, it applies the ergonomics to the garbage collector. It applies the ergonomics to the even JIT compiler, and it makes changes according to the ergonomics. Okay.
Yeah. So Vaibhav, just to add a point, actually I missed it in between, but just a layman doubt, Vaibhav. This is just by what I read in the newspapers and the tutorials. If I understand correctly, as the new versions of JVM comes in, one aspect that JVM tries to do is, before it boots up, it actually investigates the underlying platform. Based on the container or the platform it runs, it makes some optimization at the start. Am I right?
Yes, that is applicable from JDK 8 onwards. We fixed this into JDK 10, but we backported into JDK 8. Okay, so yes, the underlying problem was that whenever this container environment came, right? So mostly when you let me see if I have a ID on my machine. Yeah, I have one. So let me see if I can write some code here. Is that my screen is still visible?
Yeah, it's still visible.
Okay.
I think probably we should look at one question at a time. So I believe the first question was that how do we capture the Java memory usage using JFR? I believe it was from Ramesh. So Ramesh, I'll tell you two things. One, Vaibhav will show that if you stick around a bit more. There's already a detailed session on the Bangalore Jug YouTube channel, so you can actually go and look at it. There's a detailed session done by Vaibhav where he talks about how to capture heap dumps, how to read them, where he also brings a reference into Java Mission Control and JFR, and the fact that it is no longer bundled along with the JDK. There's already a detailed session there. So Ramesh, that would probably give you some more ideas. While if ever can show something on, if we try to create a container temporarily or something similar, let's Vaibhav demonstrate that. And then we'll look at Naresh's questions after that, if that's okay with everyone.
Sure.
So one thing, if I may add, okay. So yeah, traditionally I think a lot of, even pre-JDK8, the JVM is always trying to understand what OS you're running on and what kind of hardware you're on. So JVM always does that. For example, if you're running on an older hardware, it doesn't use the modern instructions. But if you're running on, let's say, Broadwell or Haswell, it knows that there are some advanced instructions like AVX1, AVX2 that can be used. So JVM always tries to do that. So from the memory perspective, it figures out if your container, you have some limits, if you have some hard limit set, and from the hardware point of view, what are instructions are supported and stuff like that. So yeah, JVM always tries to do that.
Thank you for those inputs, Harish.
That's a very good point Harish have mentioned. So I think there is a narrow gap between what I think Satish has asked and what Harish has explained. So Harish's point is exactly right, that JVM always know the underlying hardware, and that underlying hardware is it when it do the memory management. Okay. What I think Satish was saying, that JVM is now even container aware. So JVM initially was not container aware. So if I'll go and I will just run, give me the number of CPUs. Okay, so it will give you the number of CPUs that the underlying OS have. Okay, and this is a very big problem. Say like you are running in a Docker, and your Docker is just binded to 2 CPUs, or it has binded to say 1 GB of space, right? So if the Docker is binded with 2 CPU and I am running on a say Niagara box with 64 CPU, what will happen if Java is not understanding properly that there is a container which is before operating system on this machine? The Java will understand that I have 64 CPUs, and think like we were discussing parallel stream in the starting. I will do a parallel stream operation. It will tell, okay, go to the operating system and take the number of threads. It will see, okay, 64 CPUs are there. I will create 64 threads. Okay. And then your application will go totally crazy actually, because the Docker is saying you have only 2 CPU, but the operating system have 64 and Java created 64. So now Java respect this boundary. Java will first check that is there any Docker installed, or is there any Docker boundary here? If the Docker boundary, then Java will first talk to the Docker boundary. It cannot go to the operating system boundary. Okay. So this fix is from JDK 8 and onwards, you will not get on JDK 7. And it took some time, but this works perfectly fine now. Okay.
Okay, that's right. So the JVM is okay. Yeah, like you said, the JVM is getting more container aware. The uncommenting of memory, all of these things are trying to move JVM to be more container aware.
And the point which he has mentioned is that it was always hardware based. Like even what are the garbage collector ergonomics will run, what kind of JIT compiler one run. Java understands on what platform it is deployed. Okay, so it runs from your normal credit card, which is a smart card. Actually, there is also Java runs. Okay, so from there you can go to little higher devices like Raspberry Pi. From Raspberry Pi you can go to the client desktop devices. From client desktop devices you can go to the server devices, and then the heavy load server devices, right? So there are 5-6 different flavors. So we understand, and you will be totally surprised to know that it's like almost the same JDK bundle which go to the all devices. I mean, a smart card, yes, we slice and dice the bundle a lot, but it's almost the same code which goes from embedded system up to the server. Okay. And Java ergonomics, JVM ergonomics takes care of everything. You really don't have to worry about it. Okay, it can understand that what are the dynamics I should set. Okay, so that answers your question, Satish.
Yes, Vaibhav. Yes, Vaibhav. So that gives us, if I understand correctly, if you are starting from embedded devices like Raspberry, that's a good point. Actually, I also started experimenting. Or you are developing a brand new service. Make sure you start either Java 11 or Java 17. Then you have more options. It's always advisable to use between these two.
100%. The latest Java, the latest will be 100% more beneficial. Yes.
Why we have like JDK, like user-defined JDK, is there, right? Java 9 onwards. It will also help, right? To
Yes, I mean JDK 11 is like one of the LTS after Java 9. So Java 9 with this modular system, I cannot. I mean, again, I know we have a session on modular system also, which is on our YouTube. But just to explain you what happens that your application is there and Java is there. Your application, whatever the library or the packages it need. Okay, let me tell you. Actually, it's a module, but still let me explain you on terms of package. So if you just need Java util package, right? What will happen? The Java itself is smart enough to understand that this application needs Java util. Let me stripe down the complete other Java thing and throw it away. Okay. So it will create a binary with Java util and your application, and it will take, and it will tell you take this, and you can deploy it anywhere, right? So JRE with the load of JDK or JRE and your application, which used to be like 150 MB or 160 MB, it can get down to maybe 10 to 12 MB. Okay. So that's the beauty that that has been introduced in Java 9, and people are heavily using it.
Yeah, we know. I have seen industrial applications using the benefit of using the modular, basically Project Jigsaw, where even if you don't have Java installed on the OS, because the installer which you're shipping with your application contains the Java runtime environment, it runs happily without any challenges.
Yes. Okay. Now, since we are running out of time, just I will give you a very small demo of how you can do memory management. But this is like just touching the iceberg of the memory management. It is not about memory management. Memory management is some kind of a it's a kind of a Harry Potter series. Like you need to go for 6-7 rounds of.
Yeah, exactly.
So I am running a swing set application, and you can see that I have just coded in GMC. On the command line, you can see I have not done anything heavy. Okay. This is how I'm running GMC. I'm just going to the command line and say GMC. That's the start of the GMC. And I'm saying Java -jar swing set 2.jar. That's the way I'm running the Java. Okay. So what will happen? The GMC and all these tools are smart. Sorry, not this. They are smart enough to find out all the JDK process. I'm interested in this. It has a Mbeans. Mbeans, you all know, it is like the hook where all the application details can be taken. And it has a second option called flight recorder. Flight recorder is when I am recording the application. I am like kind of saving all the events that an application is doing, right? And most of our customers, actually, the serious customers, which actually deals with the banking, finance, they actually run this kind of tool. Because when something crashes, we need to know that what is happening 2 minutes before the crash or 5 minutes before the crash. Okay. And flight recorder gives you excellent options like record only when your heap is more than 80%, record only last 2 hours of the event of the application. So every 2 hours it will record and it will delete the older one, record when some XYZ happens. Okay, so it is not that I have to always go for a plain record and everything need to be recorded. Okay, so that's one part. Now, JMC I have shown you last time also, but I will just focus onto the memory management part. Okay, so it loaded the application. The first dashboard uses about Java memory heap, right, which says that how much MB the application is taking. And just leave the second processor part and then come to the third part, which is a memory use, right? So you can see memory is like kind of 100 MB, and that is what it is reflected by the dashboard. And if you will definitely see that if we'll play around with the application, memory usage will definitely go little up. Maybe I had something which plays with nicely with this application. Yeah. So you can see like we are getting a spike. We are getting a spike, and this spike is basically created by the objects of Java graphics. Okay, very simple to understand. Now leaving this guy down, let it run like this. There is a tab downside here called memory. Okay, and in the memory there is a first thing which is called heap histogram. It don't load because it loads you on the demand. So I just need to refresh this button and it will tell that I am loading this for you. And this will tell you all my classes and the instances taking how much of the memory, right? And you can see like you know, most of the space goes to the string and kind of integer. Very interesting. You can see integer is more heavy than byte right now because of the graphical interface. Okay. And I think Satish have covered that Java string is also a byte array now. It's no more a character array. Okay. So that change had happened in JDK 9 with the compact string, where the Java is a byte array. It's no more a character array. Okay. So this is the whole set. And one thing is that we have few plugins which can tell you the differential equation of this, but let's think that I'm not going with some kind of plugin. What I will do is that I will go to diagnostic command and I will say that give me the class histogram. Okay. Why red? Because when you take the class histogram, it's a GC event, it will stop the application. That's the red. Okay. So it will give you the warning before execution. Okay. So I got this histogram. Now what will happen in a typical application, I will like wait for 10 minutes or 15 minutes and think like the application is going around. Something you are doing with the application, and after 15 minutes, what I will do is that I will execute again the GC histogram. Okay, so I will say execute again. Okay, and these two data, again, I told you that there are a lot of tools which can tell you the differentials. But with this kind of data, I will take like 2-3 snapshots and I will see that is something going wrong. Okay, so here you can see that memory usage was like 261 and memory usage have little bit reduced only because I think I moved to some other tab. So almost the same. I know these classes are tested classes and we have done excellent code review on that. There will be no leak in these all applications. Okay. But in general, what you will see a pattern. Okay, you can graphically make this on your graph chart. And you can see that there is a culprit instance where the graph is going up. Okay, even when your application is in a steady state, that means there is a memory leak happening there. Okay, and once you will get to know that, okay, this guy is the one which is creating the memory leak, here you will just get the instances. Here you will get to know the instances. Okay, say like I get to know that there is a Java 2D pipe region which guy is leaking. So I should go and I should see that where I am using it in my application. Okay, you need to believe that underlying JDK is working fine and there is nothing leaking there. So if some class in your application is leaking out, you should know where it is in the code and you should fix it off. Okay, and this is one part of the memory management where the leak is happening. It is possible that Java code can leak because there are many options. You took some native resource and you left that open, right? We discussed like last time, weak reference and phantom reference and all those kind of things. There are other possibilities that is more bad, that you are creating a lot of objects and you are destroying a lot of objects. Okay, this also example I discussed last time. Like say like you are doing a kind of typecasting very rapidly. You are doing a class casting very rapidly. What is happening that when you do a casting, actually, you are killing your instances. Okay, you are killing your instances because it was supposed to be a integer instance and say like it was supposed to be a long instance and you are wrapped it into a integer. Okay, so that will happen. That will actually hit your garbage collector very frequently. What will happen? You will see sudden spike downs in your garbage collector and sudden spikes up. That's not a good idea because garbage collector should not run that much time. Okay, so that will also basically in the flight recorder, it will tell you, let me reduce the time so that we can save some time. So now I have done a flight recorder. So people keep recording the application like this. And flight recorder will definitely pop out with your automated analysis results. Okay. So this is the automated analysis result. And for this application, everything runs good. I don't know why this flight recorder support is 80%. Okay, because this guy is crying that your GCC version is not compatible. Anyway, so there will be like method profiling. Okay, if your method is not profiled properly, your particular method is keep hitting again and again, which is not a good sign for the code, right? There is one method. It's fine even if it's a hot method. It should not keep repeating again and again. Okay, so that thing should be fixed. then you should look for the heap content. Here it is not applicable. Okay. And there will be somewhere there will be the method profiling. Yes. Okay. So these guys should not be read. These guys should not be read. Okay. People who deals a lot of with synchronous and asynchronous code, you should look for the Java blocking and the IO blocking, right? So application file IO blocking. So it's not that your IO should keep blocking your application. If that is the case, you are writing a lot of multi-threading code, you are putting a lot of synchronization, you are writing a lot of information in the log file. You should be very careful in the IO blocking. What will happen? Your IO, your writing in the file will keep blocking your main application. So you have to deal with that. You need to make it async, completable, future, like there are 1,000 ways to do it. Okay, so this is just simple demo, which we will do it more when we will go for the later time. Yeah. So for right now, I think we are good.
And it is JDK 1.8.
I am running JDK 11. I am running JDK 11. So you can see here, it will tell me that the JMC I am running on 1.8 and other few applications, but the swing set 2 I am running on JDK 11. So it will show you all the JDK which is running with that. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Satish. I think I am done with that.